So I went to Sweden last summer in the middle of the summer, and in a park slash zoo called Skansen, I stumbled upon this cross. And legit, when I saw the cross, I thought it meant some sort of religious stuff or whatever. And now I know what it is about. It is Midsommar. Hey guys, what's up? It's the Culture Detective here, investigating your favorite movies, and today I am finally going to do a review on the latest Ari Aster film, Midsommar. I don't know, I just don't want to call it Midsummer because it's spelled like this, so it's Midsommar. Um, anyway, we have the main character of Danny, played by Florence Pugh. And right at the beginning of the movie, Danny's sister killed her parents and killed herself. Thus, Danny was in a lot of grief. And also, at the same time, Danny has a boyfriend called Chris. And Chris and some of his other friends, including Josh, Mark, and a Swedish friend, Pelle, decided to invite Danny onto a trip to Sweden. Not Stockholm, not Gothenburg, but Hälsingland, where Pelle basically brings them to his community, his family, where it's, well, on the surface, it looks like a bunch of people in white clothes having a great time, being high, celebrating midsummer, but actually, they're a cult. So some really messed up shit happens, and that's basically the movie. So, yes, I have a lot to talk about. So hang tight. First of all, this movie is polarizing. It is very, very polarizing. Some people hated it. Some people even said this is the worst movie of the year. I don't think it's that bad. Neither do I think it's all that great. Last year, Ari Aster made his directorial debut, Hereditary, and it is a horror movie that I love a lot, even though it's not one of the best horror films of our generation or anything like that, even though it has its flaws. It's still a great horror film indeed. Very disturbing, very creepy, very suspenseful. Love the artistic styles of the movie. And actually, I'm going to be honest here, this movie is even more artistically satisfying because it happens in broad daylight in Sweden, literally one of the most pleasant countries in the world. And everybody's wearing white. It's not your typical dark, scary horror. However, it is true that this movie follows a similar formula as the plot of Hereditary. The main character is dealing with grief, is dealing with a death of a relative. So she, the main character, is invited into doing something, and actually she's being set up for a disastrous ending right from the beginning of the movie. And also, both Hereditary and Midsommar also dealt with themes of cult and religion in a very refreshing take. But Midsommar is different in that Ari Aster actually upped his gore game and nudity game in this movie. There are long scenes of very clear and graphic nudity, very graphic violence, very, very, very graphic gore, more than I have anticipated. There's one shot in Hereditary that made me go, whoa. And then there are multiple shots in Midsommar that made me go, ooh. But another thing about Midsommar is that it's way more slow-paced. It's very, very slow. It's about an hour into the movie where something disturbing finally happens. There's a really, really long-winded build-up, and also after the 1 hour mark, in between the, climax and the first disturbing incident, there are a lot of, long-winded dialogue scenes that are really not that eventful. So this is one of the reasons why some people may be turned off by the movie. If there's another flaw that this movie has, it's that this movie lacks character depth. We get a lot of characters here, actually, more than Hereditary. We have Josh, who is this really smart, hardworking guy who's legitimately interested in this Swedish culture. And we also have Mark, who is sort of a comic relief, played by Will Poulter, out of all people. We have Chris, the douchey boyfriend of Danny. And we have Danny, and we also have two other Brits. We have two other Brits. Simon and Connie. They didn't do much in the movie. They just appear for a very brief period of time. We have Pelle, and we have his brother Ingmar. And we have a bunch of other characters. And other than Danny, we don't know much about any other characters. Their personalities, their backstories, their motives. They all feel kind of shallow and maybe a little rigid. That's a problem. Also, another problem with the movie is that a lot of the horrific events actually happen off screen for some reason, which is a strange thing for horror films. It's like Ari Aster wanted this to be a horror film, but at the same time, not. So the acting is so. However, I do agree that Florence Pugh gave a magnificent performance in the movie. Will Poulter is also pretty cool. Shout out to Will Poulter. Other than that, my biggest issue with the movie is that the ending is not that satisfying. It's not as climactic as I wanted it to be. The ending for Hereditary is climactic. It really just goes scarier and scarier and scarier. But for this movie, the scariest part is in the middle, and then it just kind of coasts off. The stakes feel lower by the end of the movie, and it doesn't have a big payoff. You know, in Hereditary, there is a big payoff at the end. There are characters that actually are given the freedom of fighting back the evil. But in this movie, the doom is kind of inevitable. So the stakes aren't really all that high, and the characters aren't really given the chance to fight back or anything. However, there are a lot of things that I like about the movie as well. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. The cinematography is amazing. It's beautiful. This movie is both very gory, very disturbing, very messed up, and kind of disgusting, but also very beautiful and serene and peaceful at the same time. Yes, most of this movie happens in broad daylight because when you're so up north, the sun doesn't really set that early in summer. And so a lot of the scenes here happen in broad daylight and a lot of white here. The editing is certainly more improved than that of Hereditary. And yeah, that's it for all the technical stuff. Actually, I want to add that there are a lot of scenes in the movie where the characters are high, and they actually depict that very well, according to people who have taken psychedelics and shrooms. Fantastic editing for those high sequences, bad trip sequences. Another thing that I like about the movie is that there is a lot of suspense. Right from the beginning, actually not right from the beginning, like towards the first act, the end of the first act of the movie, you can already tell that basically all the characters, except for Pelle, is set up for a very tragic ending. And you can tell what's going on, but the characters can't tell. So there's a great sense of suspense underneath the plot, and I really like that. Also, there are actually a lot of great scenes before the climax. It's just that the climax didn't really stick the landing all that well, but there are a lot of great scenes that are really well constructed, perfect pacing for those scenes, and some intense moments which I really like. Also, some scenes that maybe for some people feel silly or funny. Like there's a scene where Danny sees something disturbing and she cries. She just cries in a very ugly way, and then all the girls around her in that scene had to cry with her. And every time Danny stops crying, they all stop, and every time Danny cries, they all cry. So it's like this really awkward syncopated cry, which to me it isn't funny, because this is some traditional religious cult thing that is idiosyncratic because it is a tradition from the old times. But if you if you didn't grow up in a very traditional family or in a very traditional environment, you probably won't be able to relate with this. And that's all I'm trying to say here. I'm not saying that I grew up in a very traditional environment and family, but it's definitely more traditional than like Americans. But yeah, this movie isn't really all that original either. There is a lot of influence pulled from the 70s horror film, The Wicker Man, and also we have a movie released in the year 2003 called Midsommar, with an E, not an R at the end. And it's also about the main character whose sister committed suicide, went to Sweden, and went into this cult, and a lot of messed up stuff happened. The male lead of that movie is also Chris, and there's even a bear suit in the movie The Wicker Man. So, of course, this movie wears its influences on its sleeves. But that being said, while the ending is, again, not as climactic as I wish it would have been, and actually kind of predictable, if you have seen Hereditary, you can probably tell what's the ending of Midsommar gonna be like. I mean, I'm not gonna drop any major spoiler alerts anyway. This movie is actually kind of weird because Sweden and Scandinavian countries and Nordic countries generally give me a vibe of, people being free of traditions, being free of religions, and all of that. Very liberal. But then we have this movie where it's very much not like that. But yeah, anyway, I am saying Midsommar is a nice try, could have been better, and I am giving it a light to decent 7 out of 10. So, have you watched Midsommar from 1 to 10? How much did you rate it? Like if you like it, hate if you hate it, and subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching. Also, if you're wondering, I will watch Joker.